"If you open that letter, you'll never sleep again," the widow whispered. He broke the seal. The shack leaned against the wind like an old drunk too stubborn to fall. A single candle guttered on the table, flame shivering in the draft that slid through cracks in the walls. The rider stood in the doorway, hat low, dust clinging to his coat, eyes fixed on the widow who sat in the corner. She didn't move, only lifted her chin enough for the light to catch her cheekbones. "If you open that letter," she whispered, her voice raw as creek gravel, "you'll never sleep again." Her words cut the silence deeper than the storm. Outside, on the table lay a folded envelope, seal smeared in crimson wax. It pulsed in the dim light like something alive. The rider's hand twitched, hovering just above it. The widow's gaze never broke. Her black dress sagged at the shoulders, as though grief had dragged it down with her. The storm banged at the shutters. Each gust rattled the wood, threatening to snuff the only flame left. He thought of turning away, thought of letting the night carry him back into the desert. But the letter waited, and something in the way her whisper trembled said the words inside were meant for him. He touched the wax, warm still, though the fire had long since died. A trickle of unease slid down his spine. Was it blood that sealed it? Or just red dye? From a wax stick? He didn't ask. Questions were dangerous when the answers already had your name on them. The widow's fingers curled into her dress. "Don't," she said again, louder this time, though the fear behind it cracked like glass. He pulled the envelope closer. The seal split under his thumb with a faint sigh, as if the letter had been waiting centuries for this moment. He unfolded the paper. The words inside were scrawled in a hand he knew too well. Lines crooked with haste, ink blotched where the writer's hand had trembled. His chest tightened as though the candle's flame had burned through him. Outside, the storm dropped into sudden silence, unnatural and heavy. Even the coyotes held their breath. The widow lowered her head, whispering once more, almost to herself, "God forgive him. God forgive us all." He read the first line, and the ground of his world shifted. The words bled across the page like a wound that never healed. Names, men he had ridden with, men he had buried, and one he had sworn never to speak of again. The letter didn't just list them. It accused, it remembered, it promised reckoning. By dawn, the shack felt smaller than a coffin. The rider, Jonas Hale, though few still called him by name, sat with the paper clenched in his hand, eyes burning holes into the words. The widow hadn't spoken since. She only stared at the floorboards, as if they too carried secrets carved into their grain. He shoved the letter into his coat. Outside, the desert sky paled to iron gray. The storm had gone, leaving behind a silence so sharp it rang in the ears. Jonas mounted his horse, boots heavy with mud, and urged the beast down the trail that curved like a scar across the land. Behind him, the widow's shack shrank into a dot. Ahead, the desert opened wide and merciless. He had thought distance might free him from the letter's weight, but each hoofbeat only hammered the words deeper into his skull. Near the arroyo, he reined in. Dust shifted on the horizon, a thin line rising against the morning light. Hoofbeats, steady, deliberate. Not travelers, not traders. Men riding with purpose. Jonas slid the rifle free of its scabbard, resting it across the saddle. He counted. At least 3 riders, maybe more, keeping formation like wolves circling a kill. His jaw tightened. The letter hadn't just been warning, it had been bait. The dust plume thickened. His horse stamped, restless. Jonas spit into the dirt, squinting at the shapes that slowly formed. Wide brim hats, rifles slung across backs, the hard gleam of men who already knew his name. Friend or foe? Salvation? Or a crueler fate? He turned the horse sharply into the dry wash, letting mesquite branches slap at his coat as he pressed deeper into shadow. The hoofbeats followed, closing the distance. He could almost hear the letter whispering inside his pocket, daring him to face what he had tried to bury. Up ahead, the canyon narrowed, walls rising on both sides. Nowhere to turn, nowhere to hide. He gritted his teeth, knuckles whitening. On the reins. The hoofbeats thundered louder, dust swirled, and a voice called his name across the canyon wind. Jonas froze at the sound. His name carried through the canyon like a church bell, low and steady, meant for him alone. He didn't answer. He pressed his horse forward, deeper into the wash, until the walls narrowed tight enough that sunlight barely slipped through. The riders didn't rush him. They let their hoofbeats echo slow, deliberate, men who wanted him to know he was hunted. By mid-morning, Jonas found a sliver of shelter, a rock overhang above a trickle of water. He dismounted, rifle propped against the stone, and lit a small fire from dry sage. The smell clung sharp in the air. He chewed a strip of jerky, every bite tasting like ash. Footsteps rustled behind him. He spun, rifle ready. But it wasn't. A rider. A girl, no more than 12, crept into the firelight, clutching a torn blanket. Her eyes were wide, feral, but not unkind. She stared at the bread in his saddlebag. Jonas lowered the rifle. "Hungry?" he asked. She nodded once. He tore the bread in half, passing it to her. She devoured it in silence, crumbs catching on. Her lips, something about the way she ate, the desperate quiet, softened him. He'd seen children like this in burned-out towns, survivors of men whose names now lived in the letter. When she finished, she sat near the fire, blanket wrapped tight. Jonas didn't ask where she came from. Some questions weren't worth the answers. Instead, he stared into the flames. The letter weighed against his chest, heavier than his revolver. He pulled it out again, eyes tracing the crooked map sketched beneath the names. A river bend, an old ranch, a place that still called itself home, though it had long since turned to dust in his memory. The girl leaned close, whispering, "You're going back." Not a question. He didn't answer. He just folded the letter once more and shoved it away. Out here in the Wild West, every choice carried a price. If you've been gripped by this story so far, make sure to subscribe for more tales of love and survival, because the next twist may change everything. The girl curled up by the fire, sleep finally catching her. Jonas sat awake, staring at the canyon shadows that shifted with the wind. He knew the riders were near. He knew the map was pulling him toward more than just land. He also knew mercy had already bound him to the child, whether he wanted it or not. By dusk, the canyon spat them out into open plains. Storm clouds stacked high in the west, rolling like cavalry across the sky. Jonas rode with the girl seated behind him, her thin arms clutched around his waist. She didn't speak, but her silence weighed heavier than words. The trail curved toward the river bend drawn on the letter's map. Jonas recognized the land, though it felt like walking through a dream he wished he'd forgotten. The ghost bridge loomed ahead, an old timber span, blackened from fire but still clinging across the water like a skeleton that refused burial. That's when he heard them. Riders, close now. Their silhouettes lined the ridge, framed against the blood-orange sunset. 7 men, rifles resting easy, eyes fixed on him. Jonas slowed his horse. The girl buried her face into his coat. He raised his hand, palm open, rifle still sheathed. No point in lying. He knew why they were here. The lead rider nudged forward, broad-shouldered, jaw shadowed with a beard, eyes dark as coal. "Jonas, Hale," he called. "You got something that don't belong to you." Jonas's hand brushed his coat pocket where the letter lay. It was addressed to me. The man spat into the dirt. Addressed to you, sure. Written by a traitor. A dead one. Lightning forked across the sky, thunder chasing seconds later. The air tasted of iron and gun smoke before a single shot was fired. Jonas knew this bridge would decide it. He dismounted, setting the girl behind the cover of a fallen beam. His rifle slid into his hands as natural as breath. The first shot cracked. Wood splintered near his head. Jonas answered with his own, echoing across the river like war drums. Horses screamed, men shouted, and the storm broke loose, rain slashing sideways. Through the chaos, Jonas glimpsed a face, half hidden. Behind a soaked veil, one of the riders not charging but watching. Lightning lit her eyes, sharp and unyielding. Recognition burned through him. The widow. His pulse staggered. The letter hadn't just warned him, it had drawn him back into her shadow. Thunder rolled like judgment. Another shot rang out, closer, this time. Jonas knew the storm wasn't here to wash sins clean, it was here to reveal them, and the next name to be spoken would cut deeper than any bullet. Rain hammered the plains until mud swallowed every hoofprint. Smoke from gunfire curled into the storm, bitter and sharp. Jonas crouched by the fallen beam, chest heaving, the girl pressed against his side. The letter burned in his pocket, as though every bullet had been fired to reach it. Across the bridge, the riders regrouped. Their leader shouted orders, voice drowned by thunder. But Jonas only saw her, the widow veil clinging to her face. Soaked black dress plastered to her frame. She didn't raise her rifle. She only watched. He shouted over the storm, "Why send it to me? Why now?" She stepped forward, rain dripping from her hands. "Because you were there, Jonas. You saw what they did, and you stayed silent." The words struck harder than any slug. His mind reeled back. An old ranch, flames devouring the barn, the screams of a family that had trusted his gun to protect them. Men he rode with had lit that fire, and he had turned away, choking on loyalty instead of truth. The girl looked up at him, eyes wide. She didn't know the story, but she knew enough. Jonas drew the letter at last, holding it in the open. Lightning illuminated the scrawled words. Not just names, not just a map. Confession. Written by the one man who had broken ranks to save a child. The dead traitor the riders cursed was no traitor at all. He had been trying to set the record straight before they silenced him. The leader roared, rifle raised. "Give it here, or we finish this." Jonas felt the weight of every mile he'd ridden, every silence he'd carried. He tore the letter in half, rain smearing the ink. "It ain't yours to bury," he said. His voice was steady, louder than thunder. "It belongs to her." He handed the scraps to the girl. She clutched them to her chest, fragile as sparrow. Wings. Gunfire erupted. Jonas spun, rifle barking flame, cutting down the first rider who charged. Chaos swallowed the bridge. Men falling, horses screaming, the storm raging like it too sought justice. When the last echo faded, only the widow stood across the broken span. She lowered her veil, revealing a face lined with sorrow, not hate. "He wrote it for you, Jonas," she said, "but he meant it for her." Dawn broke at last, painting the river gold. Jonas stood in the ruin, child at his side, the past finally unmasked. If this story struck something deep in you, don't just ride on. Like this tale, subscribe and ring the bell, for out here in the Wild West, truth is rarer than gold and twice as dangerous.